In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to get Ionic 2 set up on your machine, and we're going to walk through creating a new Ionic 2 project, and then we're going to talk through some of the files and folders that are in an Ionic 2 project and what exactly they're doing. To install Ionic 2, I'd recommend going to this page on the Ionic website. Just follow the instructions here to get it set up, but essentially you'll just need to install Node and run the install command. Once you've finished doing that and everything's finished installing, you'll be able to create a new project by using the Ionic start command in your command line. And we're going to do that right now to create our to-do application. Okay, so once everything is installed, open up your command prompt or terminal, iTerm, whatever you prefer to use, and we're going to run the command to generate our project now. And to do that, we write Ionic start and then the name of our project, which we're going to call Ionic 2 to do. And then you can also specify a starter template to use. We're just going to use the blank template, which is just a standard one-page nothing template. But there's others you can use too, like a tabs template and a side menu if you prefer. And we also need to use the v2 flag to specify that we want to create an Ionic 2 project and not an Ionic 1 project. So hit enter and that'll start generating your project. Okay, once that's finished generating, you should see a screen with some messages like this, and your project will have been created now. So you can change into that by using the cd command. So write cd Ionic 2 to do, and that'll take us into the project directory. From there, we can run Ionic serve, which will actually display our application in the browser for us. So once Ionic serve finishes running, you should see your app in the browser now. We can see that the default blank template that I was talking about. From here, if you go into inspect to bring up the debugger, we can actually run it through the emulator in the Chrome browser. So if you hit this button here, that'll toggle the emulator on and off. And then we can actually see what it will look like on a device. So right now it's set to a Galaxy S5, which is an Android device. So we're getting the Material Design Android styling. But if we switch that to an iPhone 5 and hit refresh, you can see that now we've got the iPhone styling instead. We're just going to set it to the Galaxy throughout this tutorial, but you can set it to whichever you prefer. Now that we can see that our application is generated and working, we're going to open up the project in a text editor or IDE, whatever you prefer, and take a look at the project itself. So I just use Sublime, but you can use whatever you prefer. And this is what our Ionic 2 project looks like when it's first been created. There's a lot of files and folders here, and a lot of them won't really matter to you, at least not in the beginning. We have some folders here that are specific to Cordova, and if you're not aware, Cordova is the framework that wraps your Ionic 2 application in a native wrapper, and that's what allows it to be installed onto a phone and also to access native APIs. But as far as development goes, for a lot of it, you won't really need to worry about any of that. So the hooks folder, platforms, plugins, that's all part of Cordova. The node modules folder is all the dependencies for the project. Again, you'll never have to touch this folder at all. You might install some more dependencies later on down the track, but that's not something you need to worry about right now. The main two folders you need to actually work with here, well, rather, there's one folder you really need to work with, which is the source, and then also the www folder, which you're not going to be editing at all, but this is your built Ionic 2 application. So essentially the way it works is that we will be coding inside of the source folder, and we're going to be using TypeScript rather than JavaScript for the coding. Because we're using TypeScript, which is very similar to JavaScript, it just adds a few extra features to it. But TypeScript doesn't actually run through browsers by default. It needs to be transpiled into normal JavaScript code. So that's why we have this separate www folder, where basically when we build our application, the transpiler will go through all of this TypeScript code, put it together, and then it spits out the output here, and that's what actually runs through the browser. So you can see there's an index.html file here. So just like any website, you have the index file, which will be run through the browser, and that's what will load in all the scripts and styling and so on to actually run the website, or in this case, the app. But I want to reiterate again that you shouldn't edit anything inside this www folder. When your app is built, it will be overwritten. So if you make changes in here, next time you do a build, they're all going to disappear. Instead, all of the changes should happen within this source folder. And you'll see that we have an index.html in here as well. So if you do want to make a change to index.html, which probably won't ever be required, but make sure you do it inside the source folder and not the index.html file inside the www folder. Similarly, we also have an assets folder, which is used to store things like images or any other kind of static assets, maybe JSON files, things like that. And again, just make sure you put them in the source folder, not the assets folder that's inside of www. So let's just go through a few more of the things inside of the source folder here. We have the app.module.ts file, which is quite important. Basically, this is responsible for importing all of the dependencies for the application. Basically, if you create any pages, so right now we just have our home page, but soon we will be adding in a edit to do page as well. You have to make sure that those pages are imported here, and also that you add them to the declarations array and to the entry components array. You may also want to import other things like providers. We will be creating a data provider, for example, which will handle saving data from our application into storage, and then also retrieving that data from storage. So in that case, we would again import that file here and then add it to the providers array. So essentially, pages go here, and providers go here. Then we have the app.component.ts file, and this sets up the root component of the application. So an Ionic 2 project or Angular 2 projects are heavily based on components. So essentially, component is a chunk of code that handles some task. So in our case, we will be creating a lot of pages, which are components. So they're going to be different screens on our application, but they don't have to be pages, they can be anything. So the root component is basically the first component that is loaded in the application. And in the case of an Ionic 2 project, it's responsible for setting up the root page. So here you can see that we're importing the home page, and then we're setting it as the root page here. So what this will do is take that home page, which has been auto-generated for us, and make that the initial page that's displayed in the application. If we wanted to instead, say, create a login page for our application instead of displaying that home page, we would import that login page here and then set the root page to login page instead. Usually you won't really do much inside this file. You may sometimes, but most of the time it's just going to be setting up that initial root page. We have an app.scss file here. That's for creating any CSS styles that you want to apply to your entire application. And then we have a main.dev.ts and a main.prod.ts file. These are two files you don't really need to worry about at all. It's just responsible for bootstrapping the application. In production mode, it'll use the production file. In dev mode, it uses dev, but you don't really need to edit these at all. We have the pages folder, which stores all of the pages in our application. We'll have a separate folder for every page that we create. So right now we just have the one home page, but you will notice we have 3 files for the home page. So a component is generally made up of a TypeScript file, which defines the class definition. It's going to import any things we need. We're going to talk more about this a bit later, but essentially this is the logic for the component. We have the template file, which is essentially the HTML that's going to create the view for the component. And then we have an SCSS file, which again can be used to apply some styles to that component. So when we create more pages, and we will, in this example, we're going to create an edit to-do page. That's going to show up in its own folder here. Then we have the theme folder, which simply holds this variables.scss file. You can use this to change some values in the application. You may want to come in here and change the background color, for example, or any of these colors. We can use these primary, secondary, danger, and so on colors throughout the application. And it's a really nice and neat way to tidy up the code a bit, rather than having to manually apply styles for these values each time. If this all looks a bit foreign to you, it might be worth just looking at what Sass is, just very quickly. But essentially it allows us to do things in CSS like create variables, which otherwise you can't do with CSS. So there are probably a few more files which you may end up using that I haven't discussed just yet, but those are the main things you will need to know right away. And if you can sort of grasp what I've just talked about there, you should be pretty comfortable with moving forward, creating your own pages and starting to edit things. Just to get us started, we're just going to make a quick change to the home.html file. As you can see in the browser here, currently says Ionic blank, the world is your oyster, and so on. So we can make a change here. So we'll change that to do instead, because that's going to be the title of our application. And if we save that, Ionic actually has live reloading, so you can see some stuff happen there. So if we go back into the browser, it's refreshed right away. So as you're coding, you can make some changes in here, save it, switch back to the browser, and you can see your changes apply right away.